Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Billy Bailey, Park Ranger at the Florida Caverns State Park. And this is my daughter Leah. She's a junior ranger here at the park. And today we're going to talk to you about the wildlife. How many of you have been to the Florida Caverns State Park? Most of you have. Good. When you're out at the park and you're walking the trails, you see lots of different animals. Today, since I couldn't really bring you out to the park, I brought some of the park to you. So we're going to talk to you about some of the things that you might be able to see out at the park. And Leah's going to help me. She's going to walk up and down and show you some of the things. We'll start with some of the fish there. This is the palate of a mudfish or a bowfin. It's a prehistoric fish that we have in the Chipola River. They can live over 12 hours out of water. Their swim bladder can actually function as a lung for extended periods of time. And so in bodies of water that have low levels of oxygen, sometimes that's the only fish that's still around. It's a bowfin, also called a mudfish. Another prehistoric fish species that we have in the Chipola River is the gar fish. This is called rostrum, or the bill of the fish. We have 5 different types of gar in Florida. There's only 6 types of gar in the whole world, and we have 5 of them here in Florida. And of those 5, 4 are found in this area. The 5th one, the alligator gar, is found not far from here on Choctawhatchee River, and also if you were to go to South Florida, you could find them in Lake Okeechobee. But you don't see them in the Chipola River. But the long-nosed gar, like this one, this would have only been maybe a 40-pound gar, but they can be up to about twice that size and about 5 feet long. The rostrum, or the bill there, you see all the teeth it has, and it uses those to grab smaller fish.
What's that say?
This is a Rhinoceros Beetle. It's one of the largest beetles that we have here, and you see it has the big horns there. It's the name Rhinoceros Beetle. Also called a Hercules beetle because they can move over 200 times their own weight. A really unique insect that you see all the time, but you may not know the story behind it, is the cicada. Sometimes you hear it called locust, but it's not really a locust. The locust is more of a grasshopper. This is a cicada. This is what you would see here around campus on the pine trees. And what you're seeing is the exoskeleton of the larva there. And this is the adult there. We have over 15 different types of cicada that are found within Florida. Some are periodical, some are annual. The annual cicadas are the ones that you come out pretty much every year. The periodical cicadas are ones that come out every so many years. Here in Florida, we have a few different cycles, and we're here at the intergrade zone where you can see different emergences. In some parts of the country, it's more specific. There's one 17-year cycle, which means that this cicada has laid the eggs in the ground there. And those eggs, when they hatch into the larval stage, look somewhat like this one, and they stay in the ground for 17 years, feeding on detritus, roots, nutrients in the soil, and then all at once they have a mass emergence where millions of cicadas will come out at the same time, and they crawl out of the ground up onto a tree, a pole, a wall, a branch or something, and they will come out of that looking like this where they've grown those wings there. Isn't that amazing there? In our age of technology where you can send a text message and instantly reach somebody on the other side of the world, can you imagine getting millions of people together to do the same thing at the same time? These guys do it without any of that technology. It's in the ground. Somehow they all know. It's called a circadian rhythm or circadian cycle. A smaller example of that would be a bat that sleeps in a cave for 3 months or 4 months, and all of a sudden they all know it's time to come out. It's a circadian cycle. It's an internal clock they have. This is an amazing example of that, where in some instances every 17 years they all communicate and they all know, ooh, it's time to come out. It's really neat. This is a little snail called a periwinkle. Anybody that fishes, you know what a shell cracker is. It's like a brim. It's a little bit bigger, and they have a very hard palate. and the roof of the mouth for crushing snails. And that's where they get the name shellcracker. And that's his primary diet, is the periwinkle snail. There. This particular periwinkle snail is in the Limnia genus. It's found only in the Blue Hole swimming area of the Florida Caverns State Park. Sometimes these snails are so specialized and specific to an area that they become distinct species or subspecies of the genus there. May have something to do with snails don't move very fast, so over time they adapt a little bit differently to surrounding areas and become their own species or subspecies there. And we'll switch gears a little bit. This is something that's kind of neat. This is a lichen. A lichen is a symbiotic relationship that forms between a fungus and an algae. One provides protection from the elements, and the other undergoes photosynthesis to produce food for the organism there. There's filamentose lichens and fructose lichens. This is the filamentose. This is one that you find in kind of dry, sandy, arid environments there. This is a lichen. This is a mussel. It's a large invertebrate that lives in many bodies of water. This specific one is found in the Apalachicola River. It does still exist. At one time, people got a lot of them to eat. This one particularly came from a Native American village site where the natives there had actually gathered this and ate the mussel and probably kept the shell to use for a bowl or a tool, or who knows what they could have used for. They could have used it for scraping out dugout canoes once they heated and burned out the wood. Instead of bowl, could have been used to mix paint in. Lots of different uses for this. But I said it was found in a village site, so they kept it around for some reason. Most of the mussels you find today are much smaller than that, and many are protected because they were eaten so much in the past there. But this one is still found in the Apalachicola River, just not in the abundance that it once was. And these are examples of different types of paper wasp. Paper wasp is the common name for a family of insects that actually is able to produce paper. So long before papyrus was invented and used as the first form of paper, these insects were actually developing or creating their own paper there. This is probably the more common. This is the red wasp. It has a little hinge there on the bottom. This is one that you find along the eave of a house or a shop or a shed or something there. And they build this to basically raise the babies in. The eggs are laid in these little chambers here, and they developed, and it's covered with a little coating there. And when it's large enough, it breaks out of that and flies away. So they're basically used to raise the babies. And this is the red wasp. In the wild, they usually build their nest above rivers, about above water there. If you've ever spent much time on the Chipola River, you've probably seen these hanging in the limbs. And if you ever run into one, you probably learned everything you ever wanted to know about red wasps real quick. You probably ended up in the water. They get big. You'll see one in the Chipola River the size of a football hanging from there. This is the inside of a hornet nest. You know, this big nest you see hanging in the trees there? This is what it actually looks like on the inside. If you were to peel that paper around and away from the outside and get to the middle, it looks very similar. They build the same thing. They just do an extra step and wrap the paper around it. And this is a Yellowjacket nest. When we think of Yellowjackets, you think of them flying out of the hole there. Everybody's nodding their head. You probably got into them sooner at one point. But this is what they look like on the inside. You see just that little hole there. Sometimes you'll see where an armadillo will dig one up and it will expose this, and it's down in that chamber. That's what it looks like. So you have the red wasp, it has this kind of out in the open. And then you have the hornet, which goes the next step and builds the same thing but wraps paper around it. And then you have the Yellowjacket, which builds the same thing, but it does a little hole and empties out a chamber down in the ground. So all those insects all take little pieces of dirt out one by one, thousands and thousands of times to make it a little chamber down there, and then it constructs this inside of it to raise the babies in. So a few varieties of paper wasp.
How do they produce the paper?
That's a good question. They make their own glue. They basically chew up leaves and twigs and things like that, and it develop that glue inside the body, and they spit it back out in the glue form there. So they kind of make paper and glue. What next? We'll go to mammals or reptiles? dealing with reptiles. And we do have some live reptiles with today. Let's start with box turtle. This is one of the more common turtles. You find them all around in the area. You'll see them crossing the road there. This is a shell that we found in the woods here, and I shellacked it and made it kind of preserve and stay that way. We have the Gulf Coast box turtle, and we have about 5 subspecies of that. And this is one of those, the eastern box turtle. This is one of the more common here. They can live to be over 100 years old, and they can live almost a year without even eating, just living off of that, which makes them more like a tortoise, but they are technically a turtle there. And you can tell a lot by this turtle. Number one, you can tell how old a box turtle is by counting the rings on what's called a scute. Turtle Anatomy 101. The top part is called a carapace. The bottom part is called plastron. A carapace, plastron. And the box turtle has a hinged plastron. And they have that hinged plastron to cover and protect their body. So when a predator, like maybe a raccoon, comes up, think it's going to make a meal out of it, it actually is able to close that plastron up like a box. And that's where the box turtle comes from. It has one little opening right here at the front, where the front of the carapace and the plastron meet there, and that's what it breathes. They can sit there for hours and hours. Plastron, P-L-A-S-T-R-O-N, plastron. And right there where it meets, it has one little groove there, and that's so air can come in and out, and it can breathe. And it'll stay there for hours and hours until it feels the danger is past. Sometimes you'll see them on the side of the road like that, just waiting on the traffic to subside so they can cross there. And unfortunately, that does cause them to get hit by mowers on the road shoulders too. Yeah. But that's the eastern box turtle. Make good pets, and you can have 2 per person by law. They eat fruits, vegetables, bread. And what's a good thing about box turtle is you have them as a pet. If you change your mind or something, you just take it in the backyard and let it go. It's a native species, so it's perfectly healthy and safe for our environment here, as opposed to like a red-eared pond slider, which you often can get from pet stores there. And they're an invasive turtle, not native. They're from Asia, so when you release them, they displace native animals in the ecosystem, and they're not good for the ecology here. But box turtles are native, good pets. So you learn Turtle Anatomy 101. Well, within this carapace is a square right here called a scute. S-C-U-T-E, scute. Just like alligators have scutes. That's a scute. And if you take one carapace scute and you count the rings within that carapace scute, you can learn how old the turtle is. Just like with a tree, you count the rings. Now with a tree, remember you count only the dark ones or the light ones, because that's summer and winter, not both. So you pick a dark or a light and you count them, and it tells you how old it is. Well, just like that, you can count these, and this is probably a 60 or 70-year-old turtle there. And each one of those rings is a year, and the further apart the rings are, the more it grew that year. So you can tell a lot about it. Walk around with it. This is a yellow-bellied pond slider. It's a very common aquatic turtle species that we have here. It's found in the Chipola River. Many of the creeks and the ponds and the sloughs will all have this turtle. They're pretty common. This was a shell that was found in the park there on the river, the yellow-bellied pond slider. And while we're on turtles, we did bring some live turtles in today. This is a distant relative of the snapping turtle called a musk turtle, M-U-S-K, musk, because when they're scared they can put out a bad smell to make you want to leave it alone.
Oh, really?
Hey, little guy.
Is it like a fart, or is it like liquid? Like, is it like, do they?
It's a little bit of both.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of like a skunk.
Sort of, yeah. Sort of, and that's where the common name musk comes from there.
That's so interesting.
And a lot of times people will catch these fish again and hear people go, oh, I found a baby snapping turtle. 95% of the time when somebody tells me they found a baby snapping turtle, they found a musk turtle. And there's a few other varieties. This is the more common here. It's the loggerhead musk turtle. But they're very common in this area, but when you leave this area, they're not. In other parts of the state, they're very rare. And there's the striped musk turtle, and there's a common mud turtle. So there's actually a few different varieties of these small turtles. This is the smallest. This one you see right here is probably 10 years old. There. When they're born, they're about the size of a penny. They're very, very small, just maybe a little bigger than a penny. It's the smallest turtle species in North America. And you notice it doesn't have that plastron to cover its legs and its head, so it's a more aggressive turtle. You'll find that turtles that are not able to protect their legs and their head and their neck from predators are typically more aggressive to defend themselves. The musk turtle, the mud turtle, the common snapper, and the alligator snapper, they all have large heads relative to their body, powerful jaws. They're typically ambush predators, and they're able to aggressively defend themselves, whereas the box turtle, which can close that plastron and protect itself from predators, is not an aggressive turtle. Very non-aggressive. That's the loggerhead musk turtle.
Oh,
You want to see if you can see Junior out while I get
yeah, I'll get Junior. Junior.
into the box turtle. Now just the empty shell right here is a male. And I know that because the plastron, the lower part is domed, where the female, the plastron is flat. Let you use your imagination there.
That is so cool.
Oh, I thought that turtle made that noise.
Several things, again, you can tell this turtle. Number one, I know that it's a female, 3 reasons here. One, the eye color. Box turtles are one of the few animals on earth that you can typically tell whether it's a male or female by the eye color. The female is most always going to have the light brown colored eyes. The male can have brown eyes, but often he'll have green, yellow, orange, or sometimes even red. Sometimes you'll see one that has real bright red eyes there. But the female is most always going to have the light brown colored eyes. That's not true with all turtles, but it's true typically, some exceptions, typically with the box turtle. Another reason is it has that flat plastron there. The flat plastron tells me that it's a female. And also the length of the claws there. The male has long claws and the female has short. And she has a baby there. That's about a month old eastern box turtle. This one is probably an 80-year-old turtle. Just looking at, I haven't counted the rings right there, but just at a glance there, this is probably an 80, maybe 90, maybe 100-year-old turtle. They live to be 100 plus. I've counted 100 rings on several of them.
Oh my goodness.
There, because it's more,
Yeah.
it's technically a turtle, but it's more of a tortoise than
Okay.
it is. It's a very dry
So they
area.
have very long lifespans.
They do. They do?
Oh, not the big one. I want to hold the little
I
one.
want to hold the big one.
Can I
Just
hold
do it
it?
with both hands, just in case it drops.
Can I hold the big one?
Here. What you'll do, you do your hand like this,
Okay.
put one on here,
Okay.
and then on the top, that way it can't scratch you.
Oh my
There you
goodness. Oh, it's little brown eyes.
Oh, yep.
They almost look red. So how can you tell? Like they're very bright red when
It's
they're.
pretty bright red. The male can have any color eyes, so
Yeah.
the male can have that color, but the female is always
Why
been pretty
not?
close to that color.
It won't be able to get back.
It will.
Well, you can just it doesn't like.
Oh,
Thank
that's
you.
why.
Sure.
Oh,
And the box turtle is the one
it won't
that
scratch.
can live
It
up
feels like a
to
light cat.
here without food, right?
So cute. OMG.
Anybody else want to hold it?
I will.
Okay, well that was Liz. Done for the day. Just walk away.
2 hands always.
Okay. Thank you. Oh my goodness. He's so little.
Yep.
When will he start to grow?
Well, he'll start to grow.
They'll grow just a little at a time. It's very, very slow.
Little a day.
Yeah.
It takes probably 10 years to reach the size of this one.
Oh, 10
Yep.
years. Wow.
He can live a long time.
Oh. I don't think I could do a big one. I don't
Why do
think
I,
I could
why
do
do I want to
And turtles aren't slow. Like the conception is like turtles are really slow moving, but they can really kind of get bursts of speed. if they
Some
want
can.
to.
They sure can. If you've ever tried to catch a soft-shell turtle, you'll know how fast they are there. Yeah, some turtles are very fast.
So cool.
Can we see him walking here? Or- Okay.
Yes.
Its feet are sliding.
Yeah, because of the tile.
Oh.
Want to go like?
Put a little one next to it.
yes. They're pals. They are pals.
No, they are not.
Turtle. Ah.
Are these like a fluid rider, or they mainly stay on like on land?
These are land turtles.
Do they go in water ever?
They can. They can. A lot of times they'll go and sit in the edge of the water and just cool down and drink and absorb water. They can absorb water through their food, but they'll also will sit and drink as well.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just it almost went.
What do you guys feed them when they're pets?
There's watermelon in here right now. And any fruit and vegetables.
Yeah.
Yep.
Pretty much any fruit and vegetables. What we do is we typically we'll catch them and we'll keep them for a little while and then turn them loose and catch something different for programs. But they'll eat pretty much any fruits, vegetables, insects, and they're one of the few animals that get mushrooms. Box turtles can eat mushrooms and not affect them there.
Where do you like really find them? Like, is there like a strong like place? No,
Yeah.
just
Across the
anywhere.
road.
Yeah.
They can be anywhere.
Anywhere.
All right, let's see. Good turtles. All right.
All right.
I don't do snakes. Okay.
Everybody knows what this one is.
Don't you know?
This is the Eastern Diamondback Rattlesnake,
Oh, snap.
Protomus stipedius. It's the largest venomous snake that we have here in North America. And notice that we're saying venomous and not poisonous. A mushroom is poisonous because you have to eat it. A snake would be venomous because it has to bite you to harm you.
That's a nugget right there.
Difference in venomous versus poisonous. There's some exceptions, and there are a few things on Earth that are both venomous and poisonous, but overall, we're talking about snakes, you're going to be talking about venomous there. We have about 49 different types of snake here in Florida that are native, and there's a few non-native that are introduced in Central and South Florida, like the boas and the anacondas and things. But overall, it's about 49 species. Of those 49 species of snake, does anyone know how many are venomous?
17.
6.
Okay.
6. We have 6 venomous snake species in Florida. One way to remember the difference is you have 3 C's and 3 R's. The 3 C's, the cottonmouth, the coral snake, and the copperhead, and the 3 R's are the 3 rattlesnakes. So that's one way to remember the 6 venomous. Overall, you can pretty much learn the snakes of your area. Most of these snakes are not spread throughout the state. Typically, you're going to have about 4 or 5 snakes that are common to your area. Of the 6 venomous snakes that we have in Florida, 4 are spread pretty much throughout the state, and 2 are pretty isolated in distribution. The copperhead is the most isolated of these. It's found within about 20 miles of the Apalachicola River. When you get about 20 miles away from the river, you're pretty much not going to see one there. So we're just out of this range. There's a couple that have been found in this area. I've seen, I think, 1 in this area. But overall, they're pretty much right along the river there. The canebrake or the timber rattlesnake is pretty isolated to the Big Bend region of Florida, so we don't really have those here. So that leaves 4. And the 4 that we have 2 rattlesnakes. This is the diamondback, very recognizable. It's a large venomous snake. It's up to about 5 feet there. And of course it has the rattles, which typically will rattle. And then we have the pygmy rattlesnake, which is the smallest venomous snake here. They only get to about 14, 15, 16 inches, very small there. And the cottonmouth or the water moccasin, they're found right here on the Chipola River. We've actually got the skin of that one as well. There's a lot more of them than there are the diamondbacks there. This is a very dark variation right here. They're typically not quite as dark, they're typically more of that color there. Most of the snakes you see on the Chipola River are going to be the brown water snake or the banded water snake, but there are cottonmouths here. It's a venomous snake. They don't have as highly toxic of venom as the rattlesnake, but it's the same type. It's called hemotoxin. The 5 pit vipers of Florida have hemotoxin, and the one oddball is the coral snake, which has neurotoxin. It has more a toxin more similar to like a mamba or a cobra or something. They're a very non-aggressive species with very, very, very small teeth. So I don't think there's ever been a recorded death in Florida from a coral snake, but if one was to bite and chew, it could be very serious. give you some, I told you there's about 49 species of snake in Florida, about 6 are venomous. So most of the snakes you encounter are not going to be venomous. But as a general rule, if you find a snake, unless you know what it is and you have a purpose for trying to catch it for maybe a program or something, overall I'll tell you just to leave it alone. Our snakes have places in the ecosystem just as surely as bunny rabbits and bluebirds do. So, pretty much if you leave one alone, you're not going to have to worry about it there. But to give you some of the statistics, you're more likely to die from a coconut falling on your head than a venomous snake bite in Florida. Lightning strikes, bicycle accidents. But to give you statistically, in the United States, that's about 1 in 10,000. That's one of the people that die from venomous snake bites, about 1 in every 10,000. But for that 1 in 10,000, there's many fingers and toes and arms and legs that are permanently damaged or lost. So venomous snake bites are something that are serious. But if you leave the venomous snake alone, you typically are not going to get bit by one. And here's the 2 more common of the venomous in our area, the diamondback and the cottonmouth, also called the water moccasin. It's the same snake. The one that Leah has is not venomous. It's actually a pretty rare type. It's an eastern mud snake. You don't see them very often. I've only seen maybe 10 or 12 in all my time in the woods, in the swamps here. See, it's a very unique color there. Walk around with it. That pinkish red color there can be orange, red.
No.
It's a nocturnal snake. It spends the majority of its time underground. It lives near the water, usually in mud, hence the name mud snake. It's very rare, and it has a very specialized diet. It actually feeds on aquatic amphibians, amphiumas, sirens, and mud puppies, water dogs, okay, mud puppies. It has a very, very specialized diet, and if you were to see that snake alive, the very tip of its tail looks like a thorn. And it has that to pin down these slippery aquatic amphibians, which that's what it eats. They will eat eels as well, which are a fish, but primarily it's aquatic amphibians. They're very rare. This one unfortunately was ran over in the park there, so we saved the skin. Got it? And these are the shed skins of snakes that are probably still around alive today. This is the Diamondback Rattlesnake. You see it has those diamonds on it right there. And we know that snakes shed their skin to release dead skin cells. We have fingernails, toenails, and hair so that we can release dead skin cells through that. Well, snakes and lizards, they don't have that. They don't have fingernails and toenails and hair. So to release their dead skin cells as they grow, they have to shed their entire skin. Many snakes shed their skin several times a year, including the rattlesnake here. The rattlesnake, when it sheds its skin, the very last part of its skin kind of folds over and hardens and forms a rattle. And that's how rattlesnake rattles actually grow. But many rattlesnakes will grow 4 or 5 rattles a year. Every time a rattlesnake eats a large meal, it's pretty much going to shed its skin and grow another rattle, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or even 5 a year. So if you've ever heard that you can tell how old a rattlesnake is by counting the rattles, that's not true. And sometimes they'll break off and start growing all over again. And Leah has the gray rat snake skin right there. It's a very common, also called an oak snake there, same thing. The gray rat, the white oak, gray oak, they're all the same. Typically the difference depends on whether it shed its skin. When they shed their skin, they're a bright white color. And when they're close to shedding, they're a darker gray. That's the only difference in a gray oak and a white oak. It's all the same snake. Now the corn snake or the red rat snake is in the same genus. You'll see those occasionally as well. When you go to other parts of Florida, there are other varieties of rat snakes there. That's the common one here, the gray rat. Actually, it's by far the most common snake we have here. What now? That's all the rest of it. Oh, yeah, one more on top. You see him? Oh, it's right there. You gonna catch him or you walk around with him?
I think I'll catch him. He hides in there.
She's got a baby lizard here.
Alright, I'll catch the big one. Yeah.
All right, while she's doing that, I'll get into some of the other things we have here.
Is he on a telescope?
Armadillo skull? Okay. Yeah, Mark. Leah's walking around with a baby Carolina Anole. A-N-O-L-E. Anole.
No, you don't like it?
Okay, I don't touch it now. I like to look.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's very small.
It's very small.
And little baby
I am
probably,
appreciating it.
Yes.
Those are cute.
probably not a month old.
Not a month
Oh,
old.
this kind
Wow.
of lizard, when it gets in the sunshine, it will light up. But, or it can make it.
Oh, really?
That's what
It's
she
a
just told me.
baby.
Hey, Leah just said the oil from our hands can make it sleepy.
She had the trick of putting them to sleep.
Something
Something with them, she rubs their tummies or something. But that's a little baby, and that's a Carolina Anole, A-N-O-L-E. You'll hear them sometimes called chameleons, but that's not accurate. A chameleon is a totally different lizard. That has a very specialized feet, and everything's different about it. But that's Carolina Anole. Something interesting, that's the only Anole species the only member of the Anole genus that's native to Florida. However, because of hurricanes and the pet trade industry, when you go further south, there's over 100 different types of introduced Anole. And in Miami-Dade County alone, there's 100 different types of introduced invasive exotic lizards. Yes, sir.
What'd you write?
So they're usually found around pine trees, so like a little gray lizard, and they kind of like a spiky.
Yeah.
What are those called?
Fence lizards. Fence lizard. There's a fence lizard and a scrub lizard. They're very, very similar. They're in the same genus and separate species there, and some actually will integrate in different parts of Florida, but here we call them fence lizards. They're gray color and have kind of an oak bark pattern to them and little spines around them. The males will have a reddish color on their sides, and also in the springtime, in about March or so, the male's throat will turn blue to attract the female there. That's the fence lizard. We'll have a few types here. We've got the Anole, the fence lizard, the skink, the five-line race runner, and that's pretty much our native lizards here. And the only real invasive ones that we have up here are the Mediterranean gecko. The ones you see at night around the lights, they're not supposed to be here.
big eyes.
Yeah, they do. They're an invasive exotic, and there's a brown Anole that's very sporadically found. I've only seen maybe a half dozen.
From people
This
having
is-
them as pets and then releasing them.
That's it.
Wow.
They come from all over the world through the pet trade industry, and people get tired of them and turn them loose, or they get out in the house, or and then you have hurricanes. I mean, there's a lot of different things that spread them around. What's that? They do. They go from a brown to a green there.
Aren't they? Those are the most like common. Like you'll see like just around. Yeah.
By far the most common, and because they can change from brown to green there, that's where the name chameleon becomes interchanged with them, whereas
Yeah.
the chameleon is on a whole different level of color change in this guy there. Yes.
There's these lizards, they have like ridges on their back.
Yeah.
What are those?
Fence lizards.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the fence
Okay.
lizard. That's the only one that has it.
Okay.
Now they can be very, the small ones will be very light gray, and the larger ones, especially the male, can be like a coppery color there. But
Okay.
that's the only one we have that has any ridges or anything is the fence lizard. You know, fence lizard, you'll also hear them called fence swifts.
Oh, okay.
It's the same thing. I said the further south you go, the more introduced species of lizards there are. Just like I said, Miami-Dade County alone, there's over 100 different types there. 95% of the lizards you'll see when you go south of Gainesville are probably going to be non-native there. But up here, because it gets so cold, it gets in the 20s here, sometimes in the teens, and the majority of these, that's why we don't have the iguanas, the pythons, all the things that they are plagued with in Central and South Florida. We don't have those up here because it gets too cold. They can't make it. They may make it through a couple of mild winters, but overall, they can't do it. They can't make it up here. If they could, we've already had iguanas and pythons and all that up here. All right, so let's go through the reptiles and the insects and the fish. And look at some of these mammals here. We'll start with the more recognizable ones. You know what these are?
Dirt.
That's,
Am I wrong?
that's the deer.
Oh, okay.
No, you got it. This is the whitetail deer, the Virginia whitetail. It's the only deer that we have here.
Yay.
Other parts of the country we have mule deer and coos, white-tailed things, but here it's just the common Virginia whitetail. This is the buck and this is the doe. And this it's kind of small in antler size, probably a year and a half, 2 years old. Notice we say antlers, not horns. I generally don't correct people, but there's a difference. Cows have horns, deer have antlers. Horns are hollow and permanent. So something that has horns means it keeps them year-round, and the inside are typically hollow. Deer have antlers because they're shed. They're temporary. The deer is only going to have its antlers for part of the year. And this is a shed. This is where the buck has dropped its antler there. Each year in about late March, early April, right around in there, in this area, the bucks will drop or shed their antlers off. So when you see them in about April, May, early June, right in there, a lot of times they're going to look more like that. And then usually in about June, they start growing the little nubs, and they grow and they grow and they grow. Right now, the bucks pretty much have their full racks, but they're still in velvet. As the antlers are growing, they're mostly tissue. And as they get denser, more and more dense in September, October, usually about mid-October, they're pretty much full grown. And about second, third week October, they usually start to drop off that velvet there. And when that velvet falls off, then the antlers will start to harden into solid bone. Yeah.
Okay, so is it kind of like them shedding their skin cells in a way too, or not really?
Sort of. Well, the deer have hair to release dead skin cells, and they have hooves there. I think it's more of, I'm not really sure why they shed their antlers. That's a good question there. They use that, the purpose of the antlers is to fight, is for the males to show dominance, and that's how they actually fight. They will come in, they will put the antlers together and lock them up, and the one that's able to push the other one further away is the one that actually will typically be the one that the does will be more drawn to there. But as far as why they actually shed them, it's a good question. I'm not sure. Most all of the elk, the caribou, the moose, the deer, all of those will shed those.
I'm not a hunter, so I don't know, but like they're always like, oh, my deer's antlers had 6 points. How do you count that? Like, how do you know?
Just
and, like,
the number of points.
It would be
but
1,
like-
2, 3, 4, 5.
This would be a 4, and it depends on what you call an antler too. FWC will list it as being 1 inch. It has to be 1 inch to be counted.
Okay, because that's what I was about to say. Is some guys are like, no, that one don't count. That one's only a 5 point.
Yeah, I mean, it's colloquially a lot of times they say if you can hang a ring on it, it counts as a point there. So they got one there, so 1, 2, 3, 4,
Locally.
5, 6, 7. So technically, I guess you could say it's a 7 point, but as far as all practical purposes, that's going to be a 4 point there because it has 4 1 inch points. And you definitely cannot tell how old a deer is by looking at the antlers. A deer, usually for the most part, one that's about a year and a half is going to be a 4 or 5 point, something like that. And usually when they get to be about 3 and a half, something like that, they're going to be more of a 6 to, well, probably more of an 8 point there. A deer reaches maturity at about, a buck reaches maturity at around 3.5 years. And overall, they typically do not live past about 6.5. In some rare instances, it can be 9.5, 10.5. And when most of the deer are born in the summertime, so when you're aging a deer, pretty much in the winter months, you're on a half year, and in the summer months, you're on a full year right now.
So, like, have you ever seen Bambi? Like, how old would Bambi's dad be?
He's
Do you
huge,
know? Yeah, he was big, so like I was I don't know.
probably
You would
5.5 or up. Is a mature buck, probably 5.5.
I was just wondering.
In Florida, most bucks don't make it past about 3.5 in Florida. 3.5 buck a lot of times is a good solid 8 point a lot of times. After that, the rack pretty much just gets thicker and the tines get longer. But a 2-year-old deer can be an 8 point and an 8-year-old deer can be a spike. I mean, sometimes genetically they just don't grow a lot of antler, but overall, this would be something around a 2.5. All right, so that's deer. Let's do some other things. What do you think this one is?
Oh, nobody's gonna guess that.
Let me see the front.
Okay, how?
Yeah,
It
that
goes
was,
oink oink.
oh, that's a
It's
pig.
it's
It's
a hog.
It's a
Oh,
hog.
yeah.
It's a hog. This is a boar here.
Yep.
They're
No way.
Hogs are not native, they're introduced. They were introduced in the late 1500s by the Spanish, and then many, many times throughout the years. They were, of course, livestock that raised for food just like cows.
Did you saw the tusk or was it?
No, it fell out. I found it this way in the woods. They fell out at some point. I don't know where they went. Yeah, they would have been way out there. They're not native. They were introduced in the late 1500s all the way through the late 1600s. There was 2 Spanish Catholic missions within 10 miles of here, San Nicolas and Carlos. And then, of course, when the first settlers in 1815, 1825 along the Chipola River here from Georgia, a lot of Jackson's militia, they had hogs with them. And then throughout the years, of course, they're raised. And when they're turned out into the woods or they get loose in the woods, they become feral. Feral is a non-native animal that's become established there. Feral cats, feral dogs, feral hogs. And many of the hogs that we have here are a combination of breeds over the years. A lot of them will be black, but you can see them out in the woods, white or orangish color. There's a few different varieties of them. And they're exotic because they're not from here, non-native because they're not from here, but they're also invasive. So just because something's exotic or non-native doesn't mean it's necessarily bad for the ecosystems here. So you have things like crepe myrtles and palm trees that are planted here. They're never going to spread. They're never going to take over ecosystems. So they're not native. They're not invasive. Then you have other plants and animals that do. Armadillos, geckos, red-eared pond sliders. Those are animals up here that are invasive. The further south you go, of course, the more invasive. Down there they have the boas and the iguanas that are highly invasive. But up here, the hogs, they're pretty invasive. And they're considered invasive because they dig up turtle eggs, they dig up ground roosting birds, they displace native animals in the ecosystem by competing for food and shelter and cover. But that would have been probably about 150 pounds, but they can get probably 3 times that size. There's a beaver. I should have let you guess it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's so exciting.
It's what happens when you flush a squirrel down the toilet. This is a beaver. It is a rodent, just like a squirrel. It's the largest rodent in North America. They can be over 50 pounds. They're primarily nocturnal. They live all up down the Chipola River, but on the Chipola River, like a lot of rivers, they don't necessarily build dams to block water flow up. They will have lodges or hutches along the bank of the river. Sometimes they'll use just a fallen tree and pile up stuff around it there. It's an example of what's called a keystone species. With beavers, some consider them a nuisance because they build dams and they back water up, flood roads, flood fields. So to some land managers, they are considered a nuisance. But to a biologist, they're more of a keystone species. You're familiar with how the gopher tortoise digs a burrow. Over 100 different animals will use a gopher tortoise burrow. Well, the beaver is a keystone species as well. I'll give you a prime example. There's a naturally occurring small stream flowing through the forest. It's going to have a very limited number of animals that use it. It may have some minnows, some snails, a few small turtles like the musk turtle. It's not going to have a whole lot, maybe a few small fish like the little minnows, maybe some small pygmy sunfish or something like that. It's very restricted in the animals that are going to inhabit that creek. Well, then a beaver comes along and builds a dam. Beavers are herbivores. They do not eat meat. They strictly eat vegetation, mostly tree bark and young leaves. The beaver comes along and he builds a dam across that creek, and he does that to create habitat. A beaver doesn't like a creek, he likes a pond. And so what he'll do is he will build a dam across that creek, and that creek, as it starts to back up, will form a pond, and he will make that dam larger and larger and larger. And then that small creek, within a year or so, it's a large pond. And that pond, it went from minnows and pygmy sunfish to bass and brim, because fish will come in there even if there's no source of water that's coming from a pond or something. Birds carry eggs and drop them. Fish eggs are picked up in transpiration and dropped down in rain. That's why you can find minnows in mud puddles that are miles away from another place that fish could come in. So this pond will naturally become populated with fish. Well, instead of small turtles, now you have big turtles, soft shell turtles, snapping turtles. Instead of an occasional egret coming by to fish, now there's 10 or 12 different types of wading birds that come into it. So the beaver has taken a creek that has maybe a total counting invertebrates of 50 different animals, and now there's 500 different types of animals, including invertebrates and snails and fish and different things that use that. So that's what makes it a keystone species, is it takes one habitat and transforms it into another habitat that many other types of animal can use. Yeah, if you ask somebody if you've ever seen a baby possum, most people haven't, but you probably have. You just thought it was a big rat out there crossing the road or something. Anyways, I'm going to show you a couple more and we'll wrap up and turn it over to Miss Diane there. And any of the stuff that you want to see afterwards or have more questions about, when Miss Diane finishes up, you're welcome to come up here after the class is over and take a look at things. But it's a possum. Skunk. You know we have skunks here? They're pretty rare. We don't see them very often. They're more common in the sandhill areas like Washington County. And then the armadillo there, I told you that they're invasive exotics that were introduced into South Florida and Texas simultaneously around the 1950s there. And then about mid-70s they made it to the Florida Panhandle. They have identical quadruplets and no natural predators here. And so for those two reasons, they're very prolific. That's why you see so many of them, and they've only been around since the mid-70s there. All right, well, I'm going to wrap it up, and I'm going to turn it over to Miss Diane back.